that's the theme that they all tend to. And I'm going to put myself in that category for a very long time. That's what I focused in on, right? Is strength. I came from a background of playing football, and then I was a football coach, and then I got done with that, and I started doing triathlons, and it was always about this physical test, right? This ability to push myself through certain things that in the beginning seemed like I couldn't do, but it was always around strength. And I think the resilience part was something that you kind of naturally build up, but it wasn't ever something that I mentally dialed into as this is what I really should be focusing on. Talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's an amazing point.
Yeah, strength is fun. It just wanes. Father Time is undefeated. And so I always use the same example. So people that have followed me for any length of time have heard me talk about this. But I think the last strong man to win all three of the top strongest man competitions in the same year was Hafthor Bjornsson, the mountain from Game of Thrones. And so he won Europe's strongest man, world's strongest man, and the Arnold Classic all in the same calendar year. But after that competition, so let's say he wins the world's strongest man, the day after the competition is over, Hafthor Bjornsson's not the strongest man in the world anymore. Why? Because he's completely destroyed physically, right? I mean, that's a brutal competition. You're basically doing max rep of all these things for multiple days. So the day after, he's got the trophy, but he's not the world's strongest man. But he's a resilient athlete, which means give him a couple of weeks of rest, recovery, massages, cold tubs, and all those types of things, and then he'll be right back to where he was before, being the strongest man in the world. But even the thing is like, I know there's TRT and there's all these peptides and all this crazy crap dudes are injecting in themselves now, but it's like when you're 60, you're just not going to be as strong as you were when you were powerlifting in your mid 30s. It's just not going to be there. But you can always be resilient. Because I do jujitsu, that's one of the best things that any man on the planet can do to cultivate mental and physical resilience. The thing is my style is, even if I'm not better than you, even if I'm not stronger than you, I'm going to wear you out because I'm not going to leave for however long our horns are hooked up, whether it's a 5-minute round or a 10-minute round. I'm going to get tired later than you. And so if you never get tired, that just means I'm going to go harder the entire time. That's not a strength mindset, Eric. That's a resilience mindset. But that, it's easy to think about that in the physical aspect, right? So I'm going to do an Ironman, or I'm going to do a marathon, or I'm going to do a Tough Mudder, or I'm going to do this competition or something like that. You just have to put one foot in front of the other. When you're doing the Murph, you just got to do that next pull up. Then you just got to do that next set of push-ups. Like you just got to do whatever's next. You just have to keep going. The same is true mentally and spiritually. The thing I've noticed though with a lot of men is they have to be exhausted physically before they have to tap into some of those mental stores of resilience, right? Same thing, you have to kind of exhaust them mentally before they get into the spiritual side. But the whole thing about this is you have
So
to
why do you
make
think that is?
deposit. What's that?
Why do you think that is? Why do you think men and go finish your thought, and then we'll circle back on that. I shouldn't have cut you off. But finish your thought, and then
I
we'll
actually
circle, because
forget
I
where I
would
was
like to
going.
know that.
I actually
So
forget what I
yeah,
was
so
saying.
you
How dare you
you said
interrupt me in the middle of
got,
a
I
great
know
thought?
you've got to
Oh,
tack
I,
you got to
I
tack
remembered. I
into
remember. I remembered.
people's
So
their mental.
deposits.
Yep.
So making deposits in the right bank account. You never know when you're going to need to take a withdrawal. So maybe you get injured and you have to go into surgery, and your recovery will be better if that part of your body and the muscles and the tendons and ligaments and all that are stronger. Well, that's a good thing, right? So you've been putting deposits in the right bank account. That's why I love the Murph workout, because you can go from the couch to a 5K, right? You can do that. It happens all the time. I even know people that went from couch to marathon. They're just people that just decided, I'm not going to stop running until 26.2 miles is behind me. You can't do that with the Murph. It doesn't work. For those aren't familiar with the Murph, it's a workout honoring the life of Lieutenant Michael Murphy, who died, Navy SEAL that died while in war. You do a 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another mile run. And you're supposed to do it with a weighted vest on, right? And so I've done this every year for the past 8 or 9 years probably. And the thing about it is I don't train specifically for the Murph. I just train. And so when the
Right.
day of the Murph comes on, which is Memorial Day, I just put the vest on and go do the Murph. But if you're just like fat, slovenly, sluggish person, and it's a Sunday before the Murph, and you're like, I think I'm going to try that tomorrow, it's not going to work. You're not going to make it. You are not going
No.
to all of a sudden be able to do 100 weighted pull-ups, like much less any of the other things. And so it's making those resilience deposits on a regular basis. But now back to your question about why it is that way. I think for most men, we can more easily stiff arm you when we are strong. And I don't mean that physically. I mean, when we are a
Right.
strong person externally, we can be like, hey, you know what? I don't have any problems. You have problems. Hey, you're just afraid of how alpha I am. Like, oh, you're just intimidated by my size, and you're just all that. It's easier to kind of push people off. Also, it's easier to seem intimidating when you are bigger physically. Now, if you've trained a real martial art like jujitsu, you understand that size doesn't exactly translate into people being able to fight. There's plenty of people that are tall that can bench press 315 for reps that would just get smashed in a fight by someone who actually knows what they're doing. But I think just for most guys, it's just easier to push people off because most guys aren't wired to immediately start pouring their hearts out about what's going on mentally and spiritually. It's more so we are ingrained in this environment where it's a football environment or it's a jujitsu or a wrestling or some sort of a physical environment where your worth is somehow tied to how fast, how strong, or how explosive you are. So that probably has a little bit to do with it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It's so I've got a few years on you. I'm 56,
Mm.
and I think I had a physical breakdown with my back about 6 years ago that I've managed to get through. But from an emotional place, it took me to a place where it was the first time in my life where I could not physically like overcome something, and I think I had equated and put those two things together, right? So anytime I had some kind of emotional whatever, where I didn't feel good about something, where I was sad about something, anything, I would always go work it out, right? I always go do something
Mm-hmm.
hard and I could kind of process that way. And it was the first time in my life where I couldn't process like that. And I got very depressed. I had a really rough couple of years. And it wasn't until I really started to commit myself to not just, believing in God, going to church, checking the boxes, doing all the things you're supposed to do, but literally, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, spending, 20 minutes in prayer, committing myself to not just reading the Bible, but to learning it, and really started leaning on God for the first time because I couldn't lean on myself. That I started to break through some of those barriers that you're talking about.
When I think most guys, unfortunately, they're not even doing the hard stuff physically. So the mental side never even occurs to them. And so I always talk about, spiritual, mental, physical resilience. Hopefully, if you're a guy, you're crushing it in one of those areas. But what I run into all the time are the gym bros that, man, they
Yeah,
can lift all the weight and the squats. And yeah, man, they're on all the Mexican supplements they could find, but they haven't read a book since high school. Right. So if it's something challenging mentally that doesn't have to do with plates, they're not really into it. But then you also have those guys that are like prayer warriors that, they'll pray for you and they have the right theology and gosh, they just know all the answers and they've got Bible verses to back it up. But if they needed to sprint to the other side of the room to save someone's life, they wouldn't make it. They break down before they got there. And so that's part of this approach. There are things that are more natural to you, like me, just like you. I'm more naturally drawn to the hard physical things, especially when I have things going on mentally. But I do think there is value in running to those hard physical things